Okay, so welcome to another deep dive. Today I'm going to be talking about something I think a lot of you out there listening are interested in.
Yeah.
And that is wealth and generosity and how we can create a legacy
Hmm.
that we're proud of, that, really sets our kids and grandkids up for success.
Absolutely.
Um, so you've told us that you want to get smart on, these really important topics without feeling totally overwhelmed
Yeah.
by, all the information that's out there. So what we've done is we've sifted through just a ton of information to
Right.
bring you the most impactful takeaways.
Hmm.
So in this case, the material we're going to be talking about comes from the writings of Dave Ramsey.
Oh, yeah. A lot of great content there for sure.
Yeah, so think of this as your, express lane to understanding a really specific perspective on wealth.
Yeah.
So our mission in this deep dive is to pull out those core principles and then see how they connect with, how you view the world
Right.
and ultimately how you live your life.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. I think to understand this perspective on wealth and generosity and legacy, we have to start with the journey that kind of shaped this whole point of view.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about Dave Ramsey's personal story.
Yeah.
He became a millionaire by age 26,
Wow.
only to find himself bankrupt just a couple years later at age 28.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild turn of events. I mean,
Talk about a wake-up call.
yeah.
But this experience really set the stage for his focus on handling money in a way that he believes is aligned with biblical principles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about financial recovery. It was a complete shift in mindset.
Oh, okay.
So he made this commitment to never borrow money again.
Wow.
And he combined that with this just intense work ethic. We're talking like 80 hours a week,
Wow. Yeah, that's
getting out of debt, using these biblical principles that he's found.
Mm-hmm.
And he describes this shift as going from seeing himself as the owner to really understanding himself as the manager,
Okay.
with God as the ultimate owner.
Yeah. So, I mean, just thinking about a millionaire going bankrupt, it just kind of blows my mind. And
Not every day you hear that.
right, and it makes you think that maybe we're dealing with some pretty unconventional ideas here.
For sure. And that leads us to the first key takeaway from all this that Ramsey really emphasizes.
Okay.
And that is that we should be careful about just accepting the common messages we hear about wealth today.
Mm-hmm.
He really pushes for a deeper understanding of what the Bible says about wealth.
Okay, so basically, question your assumptions about money.
Yeah, where they come from, what you think you know.
Right.
So let's dive into one of the biggest misconceptions about money we hear all the time.
Okay.
People will say that money is the root of all evil.
Yeah, I've heard that a million times.
But the actual quote from the Bible, 1 Timothy 6.9, says that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil.
Ah, so there's a big difference there.
It's not the money itself that's bad. It's our attitude towards it.
Okay.
It's when money becomes more important than anything else in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
And this connects to the idea of God being described as a jealous God in the Bible. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means is that he doesn't want anything, money, family, career, hobbies, even to come before our relationship with him.
Right.
So the takeaway here is, it's not money itself that's evil. It's our priorities.
Okay, so priorities are key.
Exactly right.
Okay, so now the material dives into this historical context of Gnosticism. And I'm thinking, why are we talking about this ancient belief system?
It might seem a little out there, but it's actually relevant because the text suggests that there's a connection between Gnosticism and some of the modern views on wealth.
Okay, how so?
Well, Gnostics believed that all material things, including money, were inherently evil.
Oh,
And the text says that we still see echoes of this today, and they sometimes call them Gnostics in the land,
okay.
who believe that being wealthy is always bad no matter how you got the money or what you use it for.
Interesting.
And the source material strongly disagrees with this view.
Yeah, it actually calls it a dangerous and heretical lie.
Yeah. Strong words, right?
Yeah.
But it really emphasizes that money itself isn't the problem. It's how we view it and what we do with it.
So our attitude again.
Exactly. So this kind of sets the stage for what the text identifies as the spirits of wealth.
Okay, what are those?
Well, the first spirit is pride.
Okay.
And it's this belief that your wealth comes solely from your own hard work, like I did this all by myself kind of mentality.
Right.
And the author admits that he struggled with this early on in his own life,
Yeah.
even though he's always a hard worker.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells a story about how when he was a kid, he wanted money for a Coke.
Oh, I've heard this story before.
Yeah, and instead of just giving him the money, his dad handed him a lawnmower and said, go earn it.
Oh, wow.
So the takeaway here is to be humble and to recognize that your success is not solely your own doing,
Right.
There's so many other factors at play.
Okay, so humility over pride.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that leads us to this idea of the Ramsey family motto,
Ora et labora.
which is pray and work. Oh, yeah, pray and work. And it's actually on their family's Scottish coat of arms.
Yeah, it's been a core value in their family for generations.
Wow, so they're really serious about this.
Yeah, so it emphasizes that, we need both faith and effort
Mm-hmm.
to really achieve success and live a fulfilling life.
Okay.
And to further illustrate this balanced view of wealth, the text uses this story from the Bible about Mary
Okay.
anointing Jesus' feet with expensive perfume.
Yeah.
And this perfume was worth like $50,000.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. And some people criticized her for this. They said it was wasteful.
Yeah, I could see why they would say that.
Right. But Jesus defended her actions.
Really?
Yeah. He said that she was doing this in preparation for his burial.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that the Bible doesn't say that Mary gave away everything she had.
Go.
It's not about going to extremes.
Right.
So even in a moment of, extreme generosity, there's still a sense of balance and wisdom being presented.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this ties into a point that's addressed later on about, that whole give everything away mentality.
Okay. Looking forward to getting into that more.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit to something a bit more modern. And that is the role of social media.
Yes, the text talks about how Ramsey was initially pretty skeptical about social media,
Yeah, I can imagine.
but then he really embraced platforms like Twitter.
Interesting.
And the reason for this shift was that he started to see social media as like a real-time pulse of culture.
Okay.
He could interact directly with people,
Mm-hmm.
get immediate feedback,
Yeah.
and really understand how people were thinking and feeling about money.
Okay, so it's a powerful tool to kind of gauge public sentiment.
Exactly. And also for, direct communication.
Right.
So that was a really important shift for him.
Okay, so now let's talk about the role of work.
Yes. And, the idea that God provides doesn't mean we just sit back and wait for things to happen.
Right.
It goes right back to that family motto,
Hmm.
pray and work. Ramsey uses this analogy about God feeding the birds.
Okay.
God provides for the birds,
Okay.
but he doesn't just drop worms into their nests.
That's a good analogy.
The birds still have to go out and search for the food.
Right.
It's the same for us.
Yeah.
And the Bible backs this up too.
Okay.
Colossians 3:23-24 tells us to work at everything we do with all our hearts as working for the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And Proverbs 13:11 says that dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow.
Okay, so hard work is important.
It's essential.
Yeah.
And the text says that it's actually a part of a mature believer's walk with God.
So it's not just about the money, it's about character.
Exactly.
Okay, so now the material asks this really interesting question. What has a bigger impact on your financial success?
Right.
Your income or your attitude?
Yeah, a good question.
Right, and I think we all know the answer.
I think so too.
Right, but the text says that it's really your attitude that matters most.
Yeah, it shares these stories about a couple who's doing well financially on an income of $40,000 a year.
Okay.
They have no debt.
Right.
And then another couple that's struggling financially, even though they make $80,000 a year,
Wow.
and they have a lot of debt.
Okay.
So the conclusion is that the problem often comes down to discontentment,
Mm-hmm.
always wanting more, never feeling satisfied.
Yeah, and that can really creep into how we judge other people.
Yeah. And, the text even uses this phrase, the $100 jeans hypocrisy.
What is
Well, it's this idea that enough for a lot of people is defined as having just a little bit more than what they currently have.
Wait.
And so we end up judging other people's purchases based on our own wants and desires.
Yeah.
Her car's too expensive or their house is too big.
Yeah, I've totally been guilty of that.
We all have.
Right.
But the text says that the size of someone's cup, what they feel is sufficient,
Mm-hmm.
is a personal matter between them and God.
Okay.
It's not for us to judge. And it references Ecclesiastes 5.15, which talks about enjoying what you've been given.
Yeah, that's so important to remember.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then the material explores the dangers of this feeling of never enough.
Right. It says that this discontentment, it starts as this small thing, like a
Mhm.
pinprick,
Right.
but it can grow and grow until it becomes all-consuming.
Wow.
You're constantly focused on what you don't have,
Yeah,
and you're chasing after more and more stuff.
right.
but it never brings true satisfaction.
Yeah, it just leaves you empty.
And it steals the joy from any success you might achieve.
Oh, that's a really good point.
So discontentment, it's a
Okay.
joy thief.
So true.
And finally, the text clarifies the difference between jealousy and envy.
Okay. I feel like I use those words interchangeably.
Yeah, a lot of people do, but there's a distinction.
Okay.
Jealousy is wanting what someone else has,
Okay.
but envy is wanting what they have and not wanting them to have it either.
Oh, okay.
It's like a step further.
Yeah.
And the text connects these emotions to that wealth is evil movement that we see online,
Interesting.
like people who resent those who are wealthy.
Okay.
And it suggests that a lot of this negativity is actually fueled by envy.
That makes sense.
So it's important to be aware of these emotions in ourselves and in others,
Right.
and to understand how destructive they can be.
Okay, so jealousy and envy are something to watch out for.
Yeah, for sure.
So now let's move on to the concept of stewardship. And the material shares this really interesting story about a couple who unexpectedly came into a large sum of money.
Yes, they had this sudden windfall of wealth.
Okay.
And what's so powerful about their story is that they felt this deep sense of responsibility
Okay.
to manage this money as if it belonged to God.
Like they were stewards of it.
Exactly. And they came up with a plan for how they were going to allocate this money.
Okay.
First, they tithed on both their regular income and the windfall.
Mm-hmm.
Then they set aside a large portion, around 40% for taxes. And then they allocated specific percentages for additional giving, for investing,
Right.
and for their living expenses.
Okay.
But the amount they designated for their own spending was actually a very small percentage of the total.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they really prioritized stewardship over personal gain.
Okay, so it's not just about making money, it's about managing it responsibly.
Exactly.
Okay, and that really ties into this bigger question of why do we work?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time working.
We do.
On average, about 9 years of our adult lives are spent at work.
That's a lot of time.
It is, and sometimes we might feel guilty about spending so much time working,
Yeah.
like we should be doing something more important.
Right.
But the text argues that work within your vocation actually matters to God,
Okay.
and it should be done with integrity.
Right.
There shouldn't be this separation between our spiritual lives and our work lives.
Yeah, I've struggled with that before.
Yeah, me too.
Kind of compartmentalizing those things.
Right. And the text even says that the act of creating something through your work,
Mm-hmm.
it's a reflection of being made in God's image.
Wow.
So the takeaway here is that our daily work has inherent value,
Right.
and it can be an act of worship.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
And it leads to this idea of finding purpose within our work.
Okay.
Rather than waiting for some grand purpose to be revealed before we start working.
Yeah.
The text calls that professional limbo,
Yeah.
and it encourages us to just get started,
Mm-hmm.
to take action, even in seemingly ordinary jobs.
Okay.
And it uses this example of the butterfly effect.
Right.
This idea that even small actions can have huge consequences.
Yeah.
So the message is, don't wait for perfect clarity, just get started.
Right.
Because nothing happens without action.
So true.
And then, of course, we have to talk about work-life balance,
Yes.
which is a struggle for so many of us.
Definitely.
But the material really emphasizes that we shouldn't let our work become more important than our family relationships.
Right.
It's about finding that balance.
Mm.
And Ramsey talks about making a conscious decision to not achieve success at the cost of broken family ties.
Okay, so prioritize relationships alongside career goals.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about success. And what the material says is at the very core of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it might surprise you to hear that it starts with the heart.
The heart.
Yeah, our inner desires and motivations.
Right, and it gives this example of people calling into a radio show for advice on getting out of debt.
Okay.
And the level of passion and determination in their voices is a strong indicator of whether they'll actually succeed.
So it's about their mindset.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it goes back to that verse in Proverbs 4.23 that says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do throws from it.
So everything starts with our heart.
It does.
Us. Okay.
And the material also highlights the power of positive thinking and belief.
Okay.
And it draws on Ramsey's own experience growing up with sales and personal development audio programs. He mentions Earl Nightingale's message, The Strangest Secret, as being particularly influential.
So what's the main idea there?
The main idea is that you become what you think about most of the time.
Oh, wow.
Your thoughts have a powerful influence on your outcomes.
Okay.
And the text connects this to Jesus' teachings on the power of faith and belief.
Yeah.
So it's not just about positive thinking in a secular sense.
Right.
It's about aligning our thoughts with God's truth and his promises.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
Well, it's not just about wishing for things to happen.
Right.
It's about having faith and then taking action.
Okay.
Belief needs to be connected to goals.
Mm-hmm.
It's about working towards something specific.
So it's like having a vision and then creating a plan to achieve it.
Exactly.
Okay. And speaking of goals, the material really emphasizes the importance of setting goals.
Yeah, goals are so important.
Right.
They act as a bridge between our thoughts and our actions. And Ramsey shares an example of setting a goal for his radio show to be syndicated in a certain number of cities.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he didn't achieve that goal right away,
Right.
having that goal in mind gave him a target to aim for,
Okay.
and it kept him motivated.
Okay, so goals give us direction and motivation.
They do. And Earl Nightingale said that success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal.
That's a good quote.
And the text stresses that we should set goals in various areas of our lives, not just financial or career-related.
Right.
Spiritual goals, relational goals, personal growth goals.
Mm-hmm.
And it also acknowledges that setbacks and changes in direction are part of the journey.
Yeah.
We might not always achieve our goals in the exact way we envisioned,
Right.
but the process of setting goals and working towards them is valuable in itself.
Okay, so it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's talk about safeguarding our legacy.
Yes. And the text raises this common concern that wealth can sometimes have negative effects on families.
Right.
It can lead to entitlement conflict and all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
So it introduces this concept of safeguards
Okay.
as a way to prevent these negative outcomes.
So what are some of those safeguards?
Well, the foundation of it all is remembering that God is the ultimate owner of everything.
Okay.
He uses the example of Job in the Bible
Mm-hmm.
to remind us that all our possessions ultimately belong to God.
Right.
And this perspective helps us to hold on to things with an open hand
Yeah.
and to trust God with our legacy.
Okay, so it's about surrendering our control.
Yeah, and recognizing that we're just stewards.
Mm.
And then within the family context, the text highlights the importance of having a virtuous spouse.
Okay.
Someone who shares your values and who can help you to manage your wealth wisely.
Right.
And it references Proverbs 31.11,
Okay.
which talks about a wife of noble character
Mm-hmm.
and how her husband has full confidence in her
Yeah.
and how she brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life.
Okay, so it's about teamwork.
It is.
Mhm.
And Ramsey shares a personal example of learning to value his wife's insights and how their shared belief that God owns everything
Mm-hmm.
really changes the way they approach money decisions.
Okay, so it fosters trust and reduces selfishness.
Exactly.
And then, of course, we have to talk about teaching our children about these concepts.
Yes. And the key here is that more is caught than taught.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it means that our kids learn more from watching us
Mm.
than from listening to us lecture them.
Right.
So if we're modeling healthy financial habits like budgeting, saving, working diligently, and giving generously,
Mm.
our kids are going to pick up on that.
Ah.
And the text shares a funny story about Ramsey's daughter being shocked by the amount of their electricity bill.
Oh, wow.
She had no idea how much it cost to keep the lights on.
Right.
So these everyday experiences can be really powerful teaching moments.
Okay, so be intentional about teaching our kids about money.
Yes. And the text also talks about the importance of tailoring our financial guidance to each child's individual personality. Not every kid is going to be the same.
Right.
Some kids are natural savers.
Yeah.
Others are more impulsive.
Right.
So we need to understand our kids' strengths and weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
and adjust our approach accordingly.
Okay, so personalized financial education.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about boundaries.
Yes, this is so important
Right.
because the text talks about how we can face entitlement issues from all sorts of sources,
Okay.
from our kids, our parents, our friends even.
Right.
And it emphasizes that while it's important to honor our parents and care for our families,
Mm-hmm.
we don't owe anyone anything.
Okay.
And it gives some examples of situations where giving money can actually be harmful,
Right.
like giving money to someone struggling with addiction
Oh, okay.
or financially supporting adult children who refuse to work.
Great. Enabling them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And setting and maintaining clear boundaries is crucial for protecting our legacy and the well-being of everyone involved.
So sometimes saying no is the most loving thing we can do. Okay. Now, on a more encouraging note, the material says that becoming a millionaire is actually possible for anyone in America.
Yeah, it's a bold statement,
It is.
but it's meant to challenge that common belief that it's impossible.
Right.
We often hear that the system is rigged against us,
Mm-hmm.
but the text shows that with consistent long-term investing, it's actually very achievable.
Okay, so give us an example.
Sure, let's say you invest just $100 a month from age 25 to 65,
Okay.
with an average annual return of 12%.
Mm-hmm.
You would end up with over $1.1 million.
Wow. So it's about slow and steady growth.
Exactly.
Okay, so if it's that achievable, why don't more people reach that milestone?
Well, the text draws on Proverbs 21:20, which says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down."
So it's about delayed gratification.
Yes, and about making wise choices with our money.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in immediate gratification
Right.
to try to impress others,
Yeah.
but that often leads to poor financial decisions.
Okay, so we need to be thinking long term.
Exactly. And the text criticizes this "I'm spending my kids' inheritance" mentality
Yeah.
as being selfish and immature.
So we should be thinking about building a legacy.
Yes, and the text explores this idea of generational wealth,
Okay.
using the example of Solomon's temple in the Bible,
Okay.
which was built with David's wealth.
Right.
And in today's dollars, that would be like $21 billion.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's this incredible example of godly stewardship across generations.
Mm-hmm.
David built up this wealth, and then Solomon used it to build this magnificent temple for God.
So it's not just about passing on money, it's about passing on values and a sense of responsibility.
Exactly.
Okay, and then the material touches on some of the discussions around generational wealth in society today.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about increasing estate taxes,
Right.
and some wealthy individuals are even advocating for this.
Interesting.
But the text points out a potential hypocrisy in those who inherited their own wealth, advocating for policies that would have impacted their own inheritance.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it encourages us to be critical thinkers
Right.
and to really examine the motivations behind different viewpoints on wealth and inheritance.
Okay, so now let's talk about estate planning.
Yes, this is so important for everyone, no matter how much wealth they have.
Yeah.
The text emphasizes the importance of having a will
Mm-hmm.
as a way to direct your assets, name guardians for your children, and leave clear instructions for your loved ones.
Right. So a will prevents confusion and potential conflicts.
Exactly. And it gives you peace of mind knowing that your wishes will be carried out.
Okay, so what are the key components of a will?
Well, you need to name your beneficiaries.
Right, the people who will inherit your assets.
Yes. And you need to name an executor.
Okay, the person who will be responsible for carrying out the terms of the will.
Exactly. And if you have minor children,
Mm-hmm.
you absolutely need to name a guardian for them.
Okay, so this is all pretty straightforward, but what about avoiding drama when the will is executed?
That's a great point. And the text suggests that we avoid surprises.
Okay.
Communicate your intentions to your family while you're still alive.
Right.
If you have concerns about someone's ability to handle money,
Mm-hmm.
address those issues directly.
Right.
Don't leave it as a surprise in your will.
Yeah, that could cause a lot of hurt feelings and resentment.
Absolutely. So open communication is key.
Okay, so now let's talk about living trusts.
Yeah. And the material presents a somewhat cautious perspective on living trusts.
Okay.
It generally favors well-drafted wills over living trusts for most people.
Okay.
Because with a living trust, you lose some control over your assets during your lifetime.
Right.
And they can also be more complicated to set up and manage.
Okay.
But it does acknowledge that larger estates might benefit from trusts after death.
Okay.
And it highlights the usefulness of specific types of trust, like special needs trusts for children with disabilities.
Mhm.
So the advice is to be cautious and seek trusted legal counsel when considering trusts.
Okay, so wills are usually sufficient, but trusts might be necessary in certain situations.
Exactly.
Okay. And then prenuptial agreements are briefly discussed.
Yes, these can be wise in situations where there's a significant difference in wealth between two people before they get married.
Okay.
But the text recommends prayerful consideration, open and honest communication, and of course, seeking wise legal advice.
So prenuptial agreements are a tool for clarity and protection.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's move on to these ideas of a family constitution and a legacy box.
Yes, these are great tools for building a strong and intentional legacy.
Okay, so what is a family constitution?
It's a written document that outlines your family's core values and beliefs.
Okay.
And the key to creating a good one is to make it a collaborative effort.
Okay, so involve the whole family.
Yes, and tailor it to your specific family's needs and values,
Right.
and then live it out consistently.
Yeah, actions speak louder than words.
Absolutely. And Ramsey shares some examples from his own family constitution,
Okay.
like their belief in honest work and their commitment to traditional values.
Okay.
And it also emphasizes the importance of having a process for restoration.
Okay.
When family members make mistakes or stray from the values.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about having a plan for when things go wrong.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about the legacy box?
This is a central, secure place to keep all your important documents.
Okay, so what kind of things should go in there?
Well, your will, of course.
Yeah.
Insurance policies, financial statements, property titles, and even important passwords.
Okay.
And the text advises us to make both physical and digital copies of everything
Okay.
and store them in separate locations.
Right.
Like you could have one copy at home and another copy in a safe deposit box.
Okay.
And it's crucial to make sure your family knows where the box is and how to access it.
Yeah.
So if something happens to you,
Right.
they'll know exactly where to find everything.
Okay, so now let's talk about giving...
Yes, this is at the heart of a meaningful legacy.
Right.
And the text uses this parable from the Bible
Okay.
about a rich farmer who hoarded all his wealth for himself, and it warns us against the danger of becoming obsessed with wealth.
Oh, okay.
The farmer, in the story, he's so focused on himself, he keeps saying I and my,
Yeah.
and he has no concern for others.
Okay.
So the warning is against making wealth our ultimate goal and security.
Okay, so don't be like the rich farmer.
Right.
Okay, and then the text emphasizes that being made in God's image means we are made to be givers.
Yes, this is a core part of who we are.
Right.
And it references Psalm 139.13,
Okay.
which talks about how God intricately created us in our mother's womb. And it says that we were fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
And this reflects the character of God, who is the ultimate giver.
Right. He gave us the gift of his son.
Exactly.
And then there's another verse, Psalm 84.11,
Yeah.
that says, no good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless.